started, if that's okay. We've got some Austrians and Germans in the room, and I know they like to start on time. This is a brand new deck that we put together on Tuesday. We did this event for our Hanoi colleagues at the Lotte Hotel on Tuesday morning. I hope that we have got accurate information from those of you that are developers. We hope that we've tracked the pricing, the rents, the capital values correctly. If we haven't, please tell us, because we want to put out a credible deck at lunchtime with accurate information, and I would hate to mislead or misguide anybody. My colleagues, I believe, went to bed early last night, I think, because there was no football. They were in bed by 2 o'clock this morning. So I'd like to thank them for working so hard to make the slides look good. We've got them in English here and in Vietnamese here. So if you're sitting in the wrong place, now is a good time to move. I could have sworn that last time we had three screens, but I'm assured that we didn't. We're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the market and where we think it's going to go to. All of you know where it is today, where it's come from, but obviously what the thing that we're trying to address is where will it go, what will change, the momentum, the trajectory, the velocity of it, and obviously most of it is supposition, most of it is our thoughts, and if you completely disagree, then I'm sorry. There will be no questions afterwards. What we're trying to do is not look for red flags, but just if we see them, so we're not go hunting for red flags, but if we see them, we'll flag them. So there are things that we remember from 2007 that were very good at the time. We love the fact that FDI got up to above $20 billion. We love the fact that I think there was 98 golf courses. Licenses were given out, 98. Singapore has 22 golf courses. Vietnam at the time had 19. There was loads and loads of talk about gaming, gambling. And so we're going to see if there are any of those red flags that are beginning to appear. You'll see that some of them are pretty obvious. When state-owned enterprises in Hanoi start to talk about 120-story buildings, we should not be worried, because it's not our money, but it's definitely a sign that something is happening, and people have either a vision that may not be in line with the market, but at least they have a vision to have great communications, great quality 4G or even 5G, but it's not really necessary at the moment in terms of real estate. I worry when I see big billion-dollar projects being announced in areas where there isn't the infrastructure, but I'm delighted that when I see Korean and Japanese companies take a big vision on a township project and that have the backing and the support and more importantly the finance to go with it. So, and also I'm delighted now when Liz walked into the room to talk about obviously Maple Tree's transaction last week, which sets a new standard in quality assets being traded. And I think I've stood up here for the last probably 4 quarters and talked about how challenging it is to buy, to find, to transact, to execute in Vietnam if you're an investor. It's difficult enough if you're a developer, but if you're an investor and looking for high quality assets, it's very, very, very difficult. Obviously you're chasing a pricing issue, you're chasing a valuation issue, challenges with funding, and often challenges with transparency. So 4 good stories in the last quarter, I think sum it up for where we're going. It's difficult to see anything except a positive trend. And we're trying to talk the market down in any way, just saying that some very, very positive things, but again, this is an emerging market, so really a frontier market, moving to an emerging market, and there are things that can go wrong. We'll talk a little bit about that, the things that can throw you off, and obviously we had one last Thursday. The amount of trade between Vietnam and the UK isn't great, but certainly when the foreign exchanges move so sharply, obviously the stock markets can also suffer. I believe the losses both in London and in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh have now been made up, certainly in the stock markets. But obviously this story and CBRE has waxed lyrically since Friday morning. I think everything that they've written, and I'm sure it's the same with our competitors and practically every news anchor, that by the time it's written, the ink is dry, the story is out of date. This is a story that will last for another probably 6 months, and it's difficult really to know the implications both for the UK, but also for in the relationship with the rest of the world. So we'll keep an eye on that. I'm glad that the EU ambassador took the words out of my mouth and said, "Don't worry." Nice comment from him yesterday morning. But obviously, to be kicked out of Europe twice in 24 hours was a huge challenge for an Englishman. So I will not talk about football this outlook, but obviously my heart is broken. As it always is after every European and every World Cup. I couldn't believe that everyone thought they were going to get into the next round just because it's Iceland. Why do you think we're going to win? I think the big story for many of us last quarter was the visit of Obama. I think that it wasn't just the crowds, it wasn't just the fact that he's even better looking than I am, a great speaker. He moves like a cat. You actually saw him. There were some of us in the room that had the chance to watch one of the events he did in a very small room with some very, very young people. It was the fact that he embraced Vietnamese entrepreneurism, and I thought that was just fantastic. Of course he talked about human rights, of course he talked about trade, TPP, but the way he embraced young Vietnamese people that we all work with every day, and we know how hard they work. But for the next 10 days, every story was about Vietnamese entrepreneurism, not just in Vietnam, but in the world. And that's going to make a world of difference if you're a fund manager, if you're a banker, or whatever industry you're in. He lit and the candle for Vietnam for that month, and I think we will see we will all feel the repercussion of it. It doesn't matter whether you're trying to hire great young people to come back from. There's 10,000 kids studying in the UK, there'll probably be 20 by this time next year. I think there's 120,000 Vietnamese kids studying around the world. And maybe now they'll all want to come back to Vietnam, and maybe they all won't want to stay in London or New York or Wellington or Auckland or Boston. And maybe because of that, they'll want to come back. I think that's a great thing. I think all of you follow the same sort of stories that we do, the new businesses starting up. There's still a real overhang in the inventory issue, and I'll talk more about that later. But there's generally a feeling that most things are moving in the right direction. And whether it's the stock market, which, as I said, has caught up the losses from last week. However, as much as we read the Vietnam news, we also try to see what's going on in Bloomberg and Reuters, the FT and the New York Times. And again, the view that we all have, obviously, is that things are mainly positive, but there's still some issues there. The NPL issue is obviously talked about an awful lot less than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, but I'm sure it's still there. I'm sure it's still there. The local banks, the challenges that the local banks have, and I won't embarrass anyone in the room, I know that they are challenging. And often they're very divisive, and there's no logical way out, and we're not going to grow out of all of those problems. Sorry, this actually isn't a particularly new slide, but one on the right is important to us. Another big wake-up call was the Formosa issue. I did check this morning on whether the report had come out from my Facebook page. I couldn't understand whether the report came out, but I think what it did highlight was that yes, growth is fantastic and important because it creates jobs and wealth and affordability and all the rest of it, which for all of us in real estate is really important. But the reality is, we're trashing our environment, and it's not just, I won't embarrass the Taiwanese, it's not just the Taiwanese, it's all of us. Just as many fish were killed in the canals of Ho Chi Minh City the day after it rained as were killed in the toxic spill. So all of us have got to wake up to that. And again, I'll talk more about infrastructure in a second, but we only have one here now, and yes, we've got thousands of great beaches, but if any of you go to those great beaches, you will find more plastic bags and left flip-flops and unwanted trash than ever before. The economy is in good shape. The FDI was a little bit down, and that was on the back of, the GDP was a little bit down, but on the back of the drought. If any of you want these slides afterwards, don't feel you need to take photographs, because you'll get better quality from our website. The FDI, GDP, all going in the right direction. We're pinching ourselves and looking closely at the thing that always kills us, which is inflation and interest rates at the moment, all in the right place for us. And I don't think, and I know I'm not the youngest person in the room, and I'm probably not quite the oldest, but I must be in the top 5%. But in the 13 years that I've been here, I've never seen inflation, interest rates, and I was going to say the dog is so stable. Obviously, what's going to stress us is the fact that if the yuan has to recalibrate, then obviously we'll have to do the same thing. It doesn't matter how much reserves we've got, we'll have to go the same way. It's always great to look across at what's going on in Thailand, and obviously our only real rival out of the other big four ASEAN countries is the Philippines. And although much as we think that we get a lot of good airtime now, the Philippine economy and obviously their new president, the BPO story is still got legs, and we shouldn't discount it. It's a really exciting industry. I think 1 million new jobs will be created this year in the Philippines. It's certainly one that, as our English gets better, as our developers looking for new stories, as our requirement for back office gets bigger, I think the BPO as an industry in a Vietnamese format would be a very exciting new thing. We always want to track particularly gold in Vietnam, because many families still have gold, and when we see the price of gold begin to spike because of volatility in other markets, then we know that people will begin to move maybe slightly out of cash and maybe buying property into buying gold. So if you're looking for a dashboard, always make sure that you've got the global gold and obviously local PNJ gold prices on your dashboard, because that really is an indicator of what could move this market either sideways or indeed backwards. We're not trying to do that, we're just trying to flag these things. Back in 2007, when we stood here, the FDI, as I said, was all going into golf and gaming and gambling, and now at the moment, only 5% going into real estate. That's a very, very good story. Some of it is a little bit fickle, some of it is a little bit left field, but the reality is only 5% is going into GDP is going into real estate. At the moment, the majority of it, whether it's to do with TPP or whether it's to do with other issues, is maybe people beginning to look at other options outside China, it's still manufacturing. So obviously we have the Koreans and the Japanese to thank for that. And their loyalty to Vietnam has been outstanding. And you can see here some of the bigger projects that have been signed up in the last 4 months, 5 months. Not all from Northeast Asia, some of them obviously from, including places like Russia and the Singaporeans. Maybe not on the same scale, but equally as loyal in terms of manufacturing, and obviously more recently in real estate. This is a dashboard that we use, that we find is very, very helpful, because the problem is that the last 2 years have all been good. So we should, I know I say this every time, but we should extend this to 5 years, because we mustn't forget when we're doing a feasibility study, which many of you do and spend your life doing spreadsheets. The reality was that only 5 years ago, we had inflation over 20%. If you just use numbers from 2 years ago, you will be misleading yourself. And if you're new to Vietnam and you're a new investor, or you've come from overseas and you're just here to look at what's on, you've got to remember, you've got to force yourself to remember that inflation was above 20%, interest rates were above 20%, and the dong dollar would move within a much bigger band on a regular basis. So the dashboard is great, but don't kid yourself that it's all going to be like this forever. It will not be. And those of you that are planning long-term investments, it doesn't matter whether it's in the shipping industry or insurance or property development, we are in a very, very unusual time. Let's enjoy it, but don't think it's going to last forever. I look also bottom left, the stock market, particularly the real estate stocks, As all of you know, the real estate component of the stock market is dominated by one large group, which is bigger than all the rest of them put together. So the fact that it's going nowhere fast is an indictment probably of investors' sentiments towards maybe that one company as opposed to that one sector. And there's very few of the affordable and mid-range developers that have any real showing. There are very few that are actually covered by the analysts. We use the BCI numbers all the time, so if BCI are here, many thanks. Again, this is a completely different picture than 5 years ago. There is construction, as we see in District 2 or 7 or 9, across the whole country. I think there are probably 100 projects in places like Vung Tau, in Phu Quoc. If you go to Da Nang, if you haven't been for 5 years, it's a completely different city. Much of it is infrastructure related, but a huge amount of it is hospitality related. Many of you are maybe not in the real estate industry as your primary business and are in other core industries. And if you're going to redevelop an old factory or you're going to redevelop an old piece of land that you've had, make sure that not every city in Vietnam can have a Ritz-Carlton hotel. Or indeed a grade A office building. And across the country, I do feel as I visit Haiphong and other cities, Chadok, Canton, that people are often building a higher quality spec than actually the market will pay for. You know, rents in Da Nang probably no bigger than $12 or $14 at the maximum. So don't try and move the bar by building a grade A office building and expect $25. It just won't happen. Infrastructure, as I said, it's not just ports and tunnels and bridges, and obviously what's exciting again and much easier to move around the city is the larger airport terminals. The one in Haiphong just opened a few weeks ago. But again, flooding. I try not to laugh, but flooding in some places happens 4 or 6 times a year. It happens in the summer and every 4 years on the Rhine. But in Vietnam, it happens when it rains. Is that flooding, or is that just water management? And you know, if you were an insurer or a banker, you wouldn't lend money to people building in a floodplain, particularly if it flooded 25 times a year. You just wouldn't do it. You wouldn't cover the place with insurance. And as a developer, you wouldn't get the funding. So we've got to wise up that large parts of the city flood frequently. So I'm glad to see that the government is trying at least to allocate some funds to that. It may take a while. I worry that the 3 people on the middle of the Saigon River that I pass every morning on the Saigon Bridge have been left there because there's very little activity on the metro line at the moment above ground. I'm not saying it's not happening below ground, but if this is going to be finished by 2019, a lot more infrastructure, a lot more work needs to be done because from what we can see, it's going to run late. And for sure, the concept of doing test trials in Hanoi by the end of the year, when the tracks haven't been laid yet, again, from a layman's point of view, this does seem to be a little bit far-fetched. However, you can see here the ring roads in Hanoi, the underpasses, the overpasses. The traffic is way more challenging in Hanoi than it is down here. We're quite lucky still. Very, very difficult, especially when it rains somewhere. But you can see some of these, you can see pictures, very recent pictures of the metro system. In terms of legislation, we've got Horia here today. This Circular 36 was the first, what we saw, signs of a discussion on trying to avoid the next bubble, not trying to temper the market in any way, but to make sure that there was a conversation between bankers and developers about the ratios that were required within the banking system that would help us avoid or at least delay another bubble that we had in 2008 and 9. In the end, some of the terms were watered down. I was glad that the conversation took place, and I hope that we have frequent of those discussions with the central bank. Obviously the main sector that's moving fast at the moment is the residential. So I'll address that first. What we've got here is a chart of the market. We've tried to look at land prices. It's very, very difficult because land is used for so many different things, and it's very difficult to get real evidence on the notifiable transactions. No one will tell you the real price. There's often a tax issue in there. There's often an investment license issue in there. But this is from what we value on a day-to-day basis. This is the trend line, and you can see just how quickly prices have moved in the last 18 months. They seem to have settled slightly in the last 6 months, but you can see where they've come from at the beginning of 2011. What we're really talking about here is the fact that the condo market pricing is moving up slightly, not as much as it probably was this time last year, but the secondary market of units that have been built, completed, sold and occupied is going absolutely nowhere. So there's a secondary market in the primary market, so this is what investors or speculators are doing. I'll talk about that later. But this is the secondary market of units at developments that are in District 2, District 7, that may be 4 or 5 years old, maybe 10 years old. Those units are extremely difficult to sell. Nobody wants to buy them because there's no funding. You don't get the payment terms from developers, and often there's issues with the pink or red book. So, when you, and I think at the moment, the people that are buying in the primary market are still expecting to be able to sell to people that will make up the secondary market, but it doesn't exist. So there's a conundrum there. There being a consistent, in the last 3 months, trail of Japanese, Singaporean investors coming to Vietnam and signing up some really quite high-profile joint ventures, and some of them are first-time investors, some of them, like Fraser Centrepoint, although they're under new management, have been in Vietnam for over 20 years. But again, a good mix of Korean, Japanese, Singaporean, mainly Asian developers coming to Vietnam, and not just going into the luxury sector. Some of them obviously are, but more of these units will be the affordable and the premium affordable and the mid-range market, and not necessarily. They've all realised, these guys, with very few exceptions, that the land that they're going to be getting is District 2, District 9, and they're happy with that. And obviously they've been well briefed. They've got strong local partners, and I'm sure they'll be very successful. And again, a good example of it's not too late. Many people come and see us every day and say, is it too late to come here as an investor? And we just look at what those 5 groups have done, and they're very much under the strong impression that as long as you're investing in the right part of the market, and you're good at what you're doing, and you've got a good partner, then we're certainly, the glass is half full. We've shown a couple of these slides before, but my favourite one is the bottom one. For those of you that don't live in Vietnam, this is not a CBRE frat party. This is not our tech party at the bottom. This was the bottom photograph was the day that Vinhomes launched for the brokers an information evening, and I believe it was at the Gem Centre. I wasn't invited, unfortunately, but there was 4,000 of my closest competitors all having a great night out with the Vin Group guys. It's on YouTube, and it's definitely worth watching. And for those of you that come from Hong Kong or Singapore, and you say, well, how do the developers sell and distribute the units? Well, that's how they do it. They get 4,000 very, very motivated young brokers, and they get them going, and that's the way they sell. And no wonder they're so successful. This is some of the, this is our view from the discussions we've had with the developers in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, looking at the affordable, mid-end, high-end and luxury market, where we think the launches are today. We think we're covering most of the launches that happened in the last 5 years. And you can see there at the bottom, the purple just beginning to show, but it has a launch and then drops back. But obviously the main part of that is the dark blue, the high end and the mid end. So again, Hanoi has been dragging behind Ho Chi Minh, and also the mid end that in our view is dominating the market at the moment. And that may be because obviously there's groups, large groups like Novoland and Vingroup that are putting large projects into the market, and some developers are definitely holding back because of that, the large amount of new supply. Again, these are the launches by month in Ho Chi Minh City. Because there's such a small luxury market, obviously and because so few developers are still doing it, it goes up and down as a new project comes to life. So this is the summary of those slides where we think the absorption is, where the net absorption is, and where the sales are, and obviously the pricing. So the pricing is, the pricing trajectory has slowed in Ho Chi Minh, but increased in Hanoi. Hanoi, as I said, it would really lag behind us. It didn't get the kickstart. It didn't have the espresso for breakfast in January, and is only now picking up in terms of volume and in terms of pricing and in terms of launches as well. But I think Hanoi is now on the same trajectory as we are. Although the number of units launched is less, the reality is they're moving, beginning to move the same way. And again, they're moving into land, particularly on the eastern side of the city, where greenfield sites, where it's easier to get land away from the central CBD, which is just exactly the same story that we've got here in Ho Chi Minh City. And again, launches. Again, these numbers, and I thank you all if you take regular calls from CBRE where we ask you every month how many units you've sold. I know it's sometimes you don't want to give that information away, but this is the summary of what we think is happening in terms of units sold. In the main, the developers will obviously only launch or put out into the market what they know they can sell. They don't want the inventory lying around. You'll see it with some of the groups here where there may be a multiple tower project, but they're only launching one tower at a time, and they're obviously controlling their inventory very, very well. Slightly annoying for us, but that's the way it is, and I fully understand it. Go back to the market of the secondary market. So you could all, sure you're all aware of the fact that in a 3-year development process, there'll be people that buy to own, buy to occupy, buy to rent, and obviously buy to see what happens. And I'll give you that sentiment. But the reality is, if there isn't a secondary market, we worry about how easy it is to offload that unit. So this is the combined thoughts of where we think the market is. I've spoken to some developers this week, and they're saying, no, people want to resell or on-sell their unit that they bought 6 months ago, a year ago. We're able to help them. But the reality is, in our view, some of them are finding it quite difficult, and the paper profit that they thought they had doesn't exist quite as much as they want. Also, the ease of finding a buyer is more difficult, because if the unit's still under construction, I would rather go to the developer to buy a unit than to buy it off somebody else, because there's more paperwork, and I don't get the payment terms that I can negotiate. So we're nervous. We are nervous about the secondary market. There have been other issues. Being a developer in Vietnam is not easy, the press loves nothing more, and we spoke to them yesterday. We showed them this slide. They love nothing more than highlighting some of the challenges that you face as developers every day, whether it's land clearance or whether it's a financial issue or funding issue. Often they don't have as much knowledge or insight as you do, and they often put pen to paper quite quickly. But obviously, these stories don't make good press, and obviously there's always a real story behind it, or indeed, so we try and put a balanced view. But we also know how difficult it is when there are people out there that are trying to make your life difficult. The press often picks up on their story and not your story. The real another issue that we see that we want to draw attention to and maybe put a small flag is obviously the number of completed units that will come online at the end of this year and next year. Some of these developments going back 5 or 6 years, the biggest ones in District 2, buildings like Estella was 600, 700, 800 units. Now, Mastery is going to come online at the end of next year, and that will be 3,000 units. So when people are saying, is it going to affect the price? It's probably not going to affect the price, but it definitely could affect the rent, and it could affect the rentability. It will certainly affect the quality of life if you happen to live on that little road, on that little junction behind Tallinn. So, when We haven't had to deal with this yet because the market's only recovered in the last 2 years, but only later this year and early next year will the units that are being finished, will actually, these bigger units. Okay, Lexington, Tropic Garden have been delivered this year to Novaland projects, but some of these bigger projects are much, much, much bigger and will certainly skew the market. And as the units at Central Park get finished at the end of next year and the year after, that again will begin to skew the leasing market. So people ask us all the time, how easy is it to find a tenant? At the moment, I think it's one of the best markets in Southeast Asia to find a tenant. There's loads and loads and loads of young Koreans, Japanese, Taiwanese, Malaysians, Filipinos, Indians coming to Vietnam to do quality control jobs, engineering jobs, and they all want good apartments, new apartments, brand new apartments, if they can possibly get them. So although I'm saying Mastery is going to be 3,000 units, are there 3,000 quality control guys from LG and Samsung? Probably not 3,000, but I think that's what the trend that's going to happen, is that people that have enjoyed, like I have, and finding it very, very easy to find tenants at Zai, at Estella, our rent will be under pressure because those tenants will move to Mastery, because they will have a better brand new 39-inch Samsung TVs, not the 36-inch that we've obviously put in there. So again, be careful, because I don't think it's going to affect the pricing, but I think it definitely will affect the rentability, and these are big numbers. So keep an eye on this one. In our view, this is an important thing. It's not just the supply, the forward supply, it's the actual completion. So this is now becomes a three-dimensional concept as opposed to just supply, demand, supply. Who's going to occupy the apartments? Townships coming back in again. There's a good rumor going around that one of the bigger developers has sold 2 or 3 of its residential towers off the plan. I can't confirm where it is or what price it is or what the payment terms were. But again, that will mean that developers will begin to look very hard for the scale-up projects. I mean, there'll be room now for the luxury guys doing 50, 100, 200, 300 units, but the township guys are also going to be looking very closely at Vietnam, because obviously the economies of scale are there. But you can see here some of the projects are really very big, really very big projects. I know there's some guys here from Gore. I mean, the project over the river and City will be very, very big, and they'll take it in their stride. 10 years ago, doing 500 units was a big thing. The local developers are able to be competitive at every level now. We put this up for the last few quarters. You can see just it's beginning to even out, which either suggests that our numbers were completely wrong a quarter ago, which I think is highly unlikely, but it's beginning to even out, and you can see here that there's maybe people are being more honest with us, unlike what happened on Thursday. When they come out of the polls, they come out of buying a unit from you, they're actually telling us with a little bit more honesty with their purpose, their long-term purpose. Foreign buyers, again, completely mixed story. There's some developers that are at the cap, the 30% cap, and there's some developers that haven't sold a single unit to a foreigner. I was lucky enough to sit on the Vietnam Property Awards, and I enjoyed a couple of mornings when I went out to see some developers in District 9 that I wouldn't normally go and see. And this the NHO group, and 3 young Korean gentlemen showed me around the project. And I said, "Oh, so you haven't got any foreign buyers?" And he said, "No, I think we're up to 9%. So this was affordable projects in District 9 that were being bought by Korean and Japanese families. And they showed me on the map and said, "Mark, we are only about 11 kilometers away from the back route to the Intel and to the new Samsung and LG manufacturing facilities. And for 60,000 bucks, you get a very nice apartment." So again, 2 things there. It's not just the high-end and mid-end that's attracting the foreigners. It's a wage group, and also it's companies now buying as well as just individuals and investors. This slide we've shown a few times before. It's still extremely relevant. Those of you that are in banking, those of you in foreign banks looking to get into the mortgage market, very encouraging at the moment, particularly if there's a swing back to affordable housing, back to owner-occupiers, and obviously these rates, they may, if you're European or American, or Singaporean, these rates look incredibly high, but they're the lowest they've been in 15 years, and are attractive to some couples that are buying property for their own use, and long may they remain so. We haven't got any more on this triangle to add to. Obviously, the guaranteed yield story that we started talking about back in January is still there. Some of the developers, almost any developer that's doing anything now in Phu Quoc, Nha Trang, Da Nang, is toying with the guaranteed yield issue. It's still extremely popular. There hasn't been any wobble there. There's been no questions. It's very, very skewed to Vietnamese buyers, although I believe there are a few buyers. I'm sure there are buyers, foreign buyers as well. In the office market, again, some good activity, some good exciting projects coming online, particularly the 120-story one in Hanoi. I'm very excited about that. But it's unlike the retail market and the residential market. There's definitely companies out there that are wanting to upgrade, to move to better space, to occupy more space, but very, very few companies will commit until they see the building finished and see the quality of the lifts. Even though there are some fantastic new buildings under construction, whether it's down in District 7, or Maple Trillium with their new office building, or just behind me, the Deutsches Haus, or what Keppel are doing at Saigon Center. These are great new buildings, but incredibly challenging to get commitment, even though obviously the developers are out there every day looking to talk to both local and multinationals, but getting people to sign is extremely challenging. My ears are red. If you see my ears are red, it's not because of the English football, it's because of the pressure we're under to get those deals done and signed up. Because obviously these buildings are spec. For some of you, it's inconceivable that a developer would build a building without anchor tenants, but it's definitely the case in Vietnam. You can see here occupancy. It's got very. We're right up against it. I had lunch with Mr. Hoy the other day from Bitexco, and I've never seen him so happy. His building is practically full. This is a building that took 6 years to lease out. 6 years. He's happy because it's nearly full. And practically anyone else that owns a building here, it's up at 95%. Yes, there's the possibility that tenants may move out, but where can they go to? Very, very difficult. The problem is there's very few new companies coming to Vietnam that want to take 1,000 square meters at the start. There's lots of new companies looking, lots of tech companies, IT, telecoms, manufacturing, sourcing, pharmaceutical, legal, probably not so many banks, but they're not going to start off with 1,000 square meters in most cases. So you can see the buildings, they look great. They are all high quality, quite high spec compared to 10 years ago. Much better lifts, virtually all of them got 100% backup power, reasonably high ceilings, curtain wall. Most of them got reasonable amounts of car parking. But it's just very, very challenging. You're not going to get the tenants to sign up unless you've got an outstanding building, an outstanding rent. A year ahead, that doesn't happen. Probably 3 months ahead is going to be okay, but a year ahead, it's really. You can see here again. These are the types of companies. Still takes a long time to do a transaction, and I think what will happen, unfortunately, because what's going on in Europe is that finance directors, CFOs around the region may put things on hold, or just say, let's address this rent review next month. Just try and get an extra month. Just keep the landlord happy for a month, and we'll have a call at the end of July to look at your budget for next year and your real estate move. I think people will delay. The easiest thing at the moment, if anyone's working for a big multinational, will be delay. And I think we've all got to get used to it. Because although Vietnam is the center of our world, it's not necessarily the center of our CFO's world. And you can see here the size of the transactions, and again, my colleagues in the office services team have highlighted the fact that if you are looking to do a big move of 2,000–3,000 square meters, there's very, very, very little space unless you go to one of these new buildings, either in District 7 or in District 1. What we'll begin to see, like we've seen in the office market, is District 4 playing a much more interesting role. Sorry, that was about the residential market. You know, 5 years ago, nobody in their right mind was going to go and live on what's I call now the North Shore, along the canal in District 4. You know, that to me was the best place to buy land. Firstly, because it was always cheaper than District 1, way cheaper than District 1, just the other side of the canal, and cheaper than District 7. But I think we'll begin to see office developers take a much greater interest in District 4, because you'll be able to get good quality space there for under $20. And I know probably some of you don't want to hear me to say this, but the reality is most of us, we're 18 to $22 a square meter people. You know, it doesn't matter. Even the banks here, it's really 18 to $20. There are a few people who can pay 35, not many, and they will go obviously gravitate to these better buildings. But the reality is most of us in manufacturing or service providers, $20 is about it. So District 4 is a good opportunity. These buildings will fill up because everybody, my friend from another bank isn't here, but I know every Monday morning he goes up and down the lift twice. Why? Because he wants to meet another CFO or CEO because he's run out of space and he needs space. So they find ways to do it is meet them in the lift. So if you're looking for more space, spend more time in the lift. The retail market, challenging, but beginning to become, again, attractive as new-to-market tenants come. Saturation in other big cities. Vietnam's story is better. New buildings being developed. I talked a little bit about Saigon Center, the Phase 2 office tower. The retail component will open later this year. Fully committed, fully occupied, brand new, well-designed with some new-to-market tenants, new-to-Vietnam market tenants. So retailers and residential buyers are obviously prepared to commit much earlier, and office tenants, because of additional process of sign-off, have got to be much more cautious. And obviously developers, we must all heed that. So the story in Hanoi's story is obviously skewed because of times in Royal City over the last 5 years. Big increase in supply there, and we're beginning to get some of those out-of-town retailers now. These are some of the projects which will be opened or reopened this year. I mentioned Saigon Center. Union Square will reopen again after it's been rebranded. We're also, if any of you haven't been to a big Aeon mall, I think we're up to number 3 or 4 now, and obviously beginning slowly to become a place, a real destination for many Vietnamese families every weekend. You can see here again, whereas before it was all dominated by everyone trying to build downtown, now it's broken out, it's not District 2 anymore. It's also people beginning to understand the difference between a hypermarket, a supermarket, a convenience store, and you can see here, sorry, not going to be here, but there's a lot more segmentation in the market than there used to be 5 years ago when we had the choice of Parks and Bintan market. Now there's loads and loads of subsectors within that. We talked at the beginning of the year about Thai investment coming in, and obviously now that is obviously the major source of investment, both into retail operations and retail investment and development. So the entry of BJC and of particularly Central Group with all their retail offerings, as well as TCC, sorry, and this will, I think, certainly it will create challenges for the government, allowing these big M&A activities. Obviously, the Koreans and Japanese are coming in through a different route. We've seen the closing of 2 large parks and stores, and we've seen the beginning of these supermarkets and companies doing multiple openings all at the same time. So again, before it was 1 or 2 new stores a year, now these are much bigger, and you can see that there's a lot of competition, particularly in convenience stores. There seems to be an understanding also of some Vietnamese taste. This was an article that came out of the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago about, Starbucks isn't always the #1 coffee shop. We all know that in Vietnam. We knew that that was never going to be the case. They're always going to get a run for their money, whether it's coffee or hamburgers. There's always going to be a very, very strong local competitor. When it comes to rolling out stores and opening multiple locations, then obviously Vietnamese companies are way, way ahead of what foreigners can do. And again, you can see here the absorption. These are big numbers for us, having come from a very, very diverse, wet market-dominated market. The reality is we're now beginning to slowly look more and more like obviously what's happening in the Philippines and in Thailand and Indonesia. It's going to take a very long time for us to catch up those other markets. The new to market, the Zaras, the Mangoes, the H&Ms are all looking at Vietnam closely, looking at what's their footprint and the speed to market. And it'll be exciting, when Uniqlo comes as well. Obviously, the developers like these brands in their store, and they will, the retailers will obviously enjoy being highly sought after. The hospitality story, which we didn't even cover 2 years ago because it didn't exist, has really been the big beneficiary of the new affordability, the new confidence in the market. And you can see here that it's Vietnamese dominated. It's for as much as we talk about tourist arrivals and the ease at which you now get a visa, etc., etc. The reality is Vietnamese tourism is dominated by Vietnamese tourists. The government is challenged in terms of budget to market itself overseas. It's decided it will put its efforts in other places, and you can see where we are compared to other markets, particularly Bangkok and Thailand. The other thing, of course, to remember is that people come to Vietnam often only once, whereas people, the return trips to Thailand are multiple times. So, this is an Asian market dominated by Vietnamese. And obviously the capacity both to move people around is increasing. Obviously there are issues with our relationship with China. But we seem to have got ourselves into an interesting thing. I talked about golf as being an indicator. I talked about gaming and gambling and casinos. Something I'm really worried about is Vietnam's love of cable cars. I know there's some Austrians in the room and some Swiss and a few Germans, but why is Vietnam going into this cable car thing? I find it very difficult. So if I missed any cable cars here, or if you are doing a cable car project and you haven't told me, please come and see me afterwards. The guys from Ving Group are here. I'm just worried if I missed anything. Sure. The cable cars. Okay. You're not doing a cable car in District 4, are you? German House is going to have a cable car. No. However, again, the world press gives Vietnam a hard time, and unfortunately, as much as there's good stories about Obama's visit or cable cars, we also have very challenging stories, and people don't like to read that their families or their children have gone missing when they've gone rafting. However well organised it may be, and however licensed it may be, the reality is, unfortunately, we get these stories in the press all the time. And again, the toxic spill, Formosa toxic spill, will pull people off. So again, we've just got to make sure the story comes out. We're working hard on licensing. I ran past this boat the day before that happened in Da Nang, and I must admit, I'm not a great sailor, and I thought when you cram 50 people on these boats that are meant for 28, someone somewhere has got to say this isn't clever. On the whole, though, it's promising. There is a huge amount of construction now in Da Nang and in Phu Quoc, as I said. The experience may be lost, may be wasted. It's not going to be all beautiful, it won't all be successful. It's not necessarily for everyone in the room, but for sure the developers are now reaching out to a much wider group of operators and investors. They're looking for more integrated, and whatever that means in the Vietnamese context. I think they're trying to get more out of your guests. I think that's what integration means. Whether it's with gaming or with Mervyn picked a building for MIK, a Swiss village, which I'm really looking forward to visiting. But you can see here some very interesting architecture designs. Really quite innovative ideas to get people to come to these new locations. And it's good to see at last that the hotel operators, but more importantly the local developers, are realizing that the three-star markets, particularly the Holiday Inn type projects, Holiday Express, are going to be really very successful in Vietnam. We have a budget of $100 a month, $100 a night for travel. And, I'm sure that I'm not that bad a boss, but for $100, you don't get anything that's international at the moment. But it's great, and I'm sure Greg is smiling that he'll be able to upgrade from the Cathedral Hotel in Hanoi to maybe something a bit better in 5 or 6 years' time when it's built. And again, the types of hotels that are coming is much wider. People are beginning to realize that there are other things apart from 5-star hotels that can be successvel. And it's not just the foreigners that are building these 5-star hotels. Practically all of this development is Vietnamese development. The funds aren't doing the hotels anymore. It's the Vietnamese developers that are doing all of this. And they're having pretty good conversations with the operators. These groups now know how to read and write and understand a big operator, a 75-page operator contract. Again, you can see here the types of projects that are being built and where these second homes are being sold. So these are big numbers, and I think that this obviously is a growth sector. Is it going to be one that wobbles? I don't know. I think there's obviously a very finite number of people that can afford $1 million villa. So I'll say it again, it's a finite number. I can't quantify whether it's very finite. But if you look across the car sales, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that actually this is exactly what the Vietnamese family is going to aspire to, or should aspire to, do aspire to, and the 10% guarantee yield for 10 years. Well, what better hedge is that? I mean, that's a fantastic hedge. These are some of the projects which are ongoing, and again, it's not just the villas, it's the condotel market. There's lots of hybrids of this, even timeshare and fractional ownership being built in Nha Trang. So, just think back 3 or 4 years ago, what a change. The sector has changed more than anything. I think there's 9 conferences this year on hospitality, which is 9 more than there have been in the last 5 years. So a big change. Clearly, it's not going to be all up and all beautiful and all perfect. It definitely will not be. But there's a lot more opportunity if you're a developer. And I think we're even hearing not just the management, not the typical management contracts, but we're also hearing developers that will do a lease type contract, which if you've been here in Vietnam for 10 years and you are an operator, that's probably the last thing you want to hear, but that's the reality. Again, in Da Nang, maybe it's too early to compare to some of the Thai experience, but again, if you think about the 1 flight a week to Bangkok 10 years ago from Da Nang, which then got cancelled, and to where we are today, and it's just amazing how far we've come. And if you the one place I don't mind being delayed is Da Nang Airport, because you can see all the international flights, and it's if you're there with your children, it's quite fun to do a little game with them. And you can see the range of places that now Da Nang serves. And let's hope this goes to Phu Quoc, because if it doesn't go to Phu Quoc, it will remain a very local story. There's, like the rest of Asia, the biggest tourists in Thailand, in Singapore, obviously in Hong Kong, in the Philippines are all Chinese. And there's after 2 years ago, 2 years and 1 month ago, when we weren't talking to each other, things seem to have calmed down. We seem to have a much better relationship. We're obviously slightly, we're looking at this. There have been some interesting stories from land parcelization in Da Nang and a reaction against that by mainland Chinese companies, but obviously we're talking again. I think one of our senior ministers was up in Da Nang, up in Beijing this week. The telephone is now obviously working. And obviously when you get to know what mainland Chinese tourists want, it's an all-in package, that's obviously a huge source of tourism. 250 million tourists a year from mainland China, going all over the world. On investment, again, the big story was Basel being acquired by Mapletree. It was the same week that another big transaction was done, this time in Singapore. The GFA was about the same size, the total construction area about the same size, but the price was 6 times bigger in Singapore for a similar asset, and I think the yield was 4 times bigger here. So, not surprisingly, if you're from Carlisle or Blackstone or KKR, it's a very tough market to find something, but hopefully those types of groups will come back to Vietnam and start and give us another chance. But the problem is there's very few of these assets around. They don't change hands very often, and it's a very, 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 very competitive market. And obviously once you've got them, you're not in a hurry to sell them. The land pricing is still continued. For those of you that come from outside of Vietnam, I think these numbers are correct. The PR bit is for plot ratio, AV is a combination value, so the land price divided by the plot ratio, or the FAR, the floor area ratio, gives you the AV, the cost per land per square meter by the per plot ratio. These are very, very big numbers. And what it's going to do, it's going to squeeze out the affordable housing guys. It's fine for you guys that are doing high quality, grade A, grade B, but if you're trying to do grade C and you don't have the land bank, this is killing you. It's fine for the moment, but when you come to replenish your stock of land, very, very difficult to get at the same price. So this is very, very good. Unless you've got amazing relationships and you can do deals with the government or government departments, this is killing everyone. This is particularly going to kill the affordable housing sector and the social housing sector. So these are big numbers, and obviously if you're in the business development part of a developer, you'll understand just, and I'm sure agree, this is killing all of us. And it's probably going to continue. The problem is there are no, the big companies in other markets get their land at auction and at tender, at government auction, government tender. There's a lot of advance warning, and they pack the room with the developers, and they manipulate the supply. That doesn't happen here. So, nothing changes there. And these are some of the other transactions. Some of them, a good mixture, read about all of them, I'm sure. Foreigner to foreigner, foreigner to local, local to foreigner, foreigner to local. A good mix. Some of them is because of coming to the end of their investment license, and some of them obviously opportunistic, and some of them as the Vietnamese groups mature and they want income-producing assets. I don't think 10 years ago there was a word for income-producing assets in Vietnamese. Now it's Vietnamese companies are looking just as closely at income-producing assets as foreign groups are, and put a different, obviously, value on that income and that speed, particularly as hotels transact as well. As we all know, hotels often don't make money in their first few years, unless you're the end gallery, and often it's the second or third owner that owns property. Again, where are these returns? We think that the Vietnam story, in terms of yield, is attractive, of cap rate is attractive, but obviously in the next few months, everybody will be putting all of these acquisitions on hold until they see what happens to the dollar, the effects of Brexit. We don't often talk about industrial. It would be unfair not to. This time, I intimated at the start, is it to do with China? Is it to do with TPP? Is it to do with just people having confidence that Vietnam is a great place to do manufacturing, not just for garments and footwear, and other things as well? You can see here, some of it, of course, is to do with with labour costs, with infrastructure improving, labour law, and the fact that obviously our labour laws and our issues with wildcat strikes, which 2 or 3 years ago was something my AmCham meetings we used to talk about all the time, is now not such a big issue. Some big new investors reinvesting in Vietnam, so I'm saying again, some big operators, investors, manufacturers continuing to further improve their investment in Vietnam. All of these companies, particularly Semcor, which have been here for nearly a generation now, particularly Semcor. And again, the big multinationals, particularly FMCG, again doubling up. And if I haven't mentioned your company, I apologise, but the list is quite long. Obviously, these companies know exactly what they're getting in Vietnam. They know the challenges and they know the benefits. And obviously, because of ASEAN economic integration, many of them are using Vietnam as a hub because they've been successful here as they push into Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and then they know what they're getting. And again, as I said, dominated certainly by the Koreans and the Japanese. So this is where my colleagues believe everything is going. I'm going to take my glasses off for that. Absolutely right. Couldn't disagree with that. And these are some of the things we talked about in January that some of you, if you came, some of them we got absolutely right, and some of them we got completely wrong. We did get the thing about Leicester City right. I think one of the big things that hopefully you don't receive more than 3 spam messages from CBRE a year, but hopefully our movement away from SMS to Facebook and WhatsApp gives you a slightly more accurate opinion of what we're trying to do. And if you are still getting SMSs from us, then please tell me. It's probably from our former colleagues, actually. So the impact of technology is really being felt in the market, and I think that will continue. I think it will improve as well. My colleagues have been down to Bangkok twice in the last month to see how the Thais are using technology in development and sales, distribution, marketing, and I think hopefully you'll all see the benefit of that and get less spam, SMS, or anything else. And I think we've been pitching in the last few weeks for some larger building management opportunities. We took over the Fumihong portfolio in January, and you know, we're seeing just how the requirement by big local developers, international developers, of wanting real-time information and not wanting an occupancy list at the end of the month, which is already wrong, which doesn't have the right figures and it isn't much use. So I think that people's requirement for real-time information, and much greater use of technology in asset management, we won't be able to get away with, as I said, the quarterly report for much longer, and nor should we. We should be using the same techniques that we use in London or New York for managing your assets. And hopefully that will happen much quicker than this obviously to do with this building management. I'm quite negative now on TPP. I wish I wasn't, and I think a lot of the manufacturing has been coming to Vietnam because obviously Vietnam is one of the signatories of. But at the same time, if it doesn't happen this year, it could happen later on. And Obama was very clear in his messaging when he was here. He said, you know, I signed some of the trade agreements that George W. gave me. I tweaked them. I didn't agree with all the wording, and I renegotiated some of the points, particularly with the South Korea trade agreement. And a couple of years later, I signed it. Apparently, it was 4 years later, so I think he's being a little bit economic with the truth. But it went through in pretty much the same wording that it was started 4 years before. But I don't think it will happen this year, and I think that's a shame. However, if we still live up to all the agreements from the Vietnam side and a watered down TPP, maybe with some of the other signatories around the Pacific, well, I think it's difficult to do without the States. You know, it's a good thing. At the same time, we've got a new government that's finding its way, which is good. So I stand here today, at the end of June. There are definitely some flags out there. I don't think they're big red flags, I'm nervous about not the new supply, but I'm nervous about the lack of secondary market. I'm nervous about who will occupy, and it'll be interesting to see in the next year this where the mid-market takes us. I'm still very, very bullish about the affordable housing, but I can just see how difficult it is to acquire land. I think that you're going to have to be very brave office developers and realise that the tenants will come a bit of a rush, and it won't be a year before you finish your building. It'll be 3 to 6 months, but you're just going to have to accept that that's the way it is. And I'm very optimistic about the broadening of the hospitality market, we're beginning to see some very nice assets being built there. We've seen some horrible ones as well, but I'm very nervous about the cable car business. On that, we've decided to really, instead of doing these things 3 weeks in advance when it suits Marc's travel, we're actually going to, we stand here and tell you we're going to do the next one on the 4th of October in Hanoi and the 6th of October in Ho Chi Minh City, and we're going to do a hospitality event where we'll bring some of our CBRE hotels guys from Singapore and down from Hong Kong for a similar event to this, probably a morning briefing or an evening briefing on where we see the market opportunities and who are the groups that are still coming to invest, and what are the things that the Thais and the Indonesians and Filipinos are doing that we're not doing yet, because there's still a lot of things out there that we're not doing. And we'll do the January forecast in January, on the 10th and 12th. So if you've got time, please fill out our questionnaire. If you haven't, I understand, breakfast is still ongoing outside. Those of you that haven't had breakfast. Thank you to my colleagues that went to bed late last night to make sure that everything, I hope, is as accurate. It wasn't. If you've missed your cable car, please come and tell me afterwards. Everything I've said with my fingers behind my back. I hope I haven't upset anyone if we haven't got the numbers right. If I've exposed something I should have done, come and tell me nicely. Please fill out the questionnaire that my colleagues have put on the table. And thank you very much from Marc, CBRE, all my colleagues, both from Cambodia. So if anyone's got any doing anything in Cambodia, my colleague that runs our valuation research team has got a very smart red tie on the back, and my colleagues from Singapore who are doing projects for Vietnamese developers in Singapore are also here. On behalf of all of CBRE, thank you very much for coming. Thank you.